Greetings. How's everyone doing today? On this, the day that this video is being shot is actually on a Sunday, so I decided to take you guys to school. You know, I know most of my subscribers and followers and people of that nature, like, they're not people that necessarily go to church. So I decided to kind of take you to school because you still need that positive light, that positive information, you know, to get your mind right and to quicken your spirit and to stay in tune with nature. Actually, the original church, when you research the word church, I think I may have pointed this out in another video, but when you research the word church literally means circle. So when you like taking someone to church, in reality, you're supposed to be bringing them to the sacred circle, the flower of life. You're supposed to be bringing them to the knowledge of the zodiac, the knowledge of the sun. This is why you go to church on a Sunday, because the original people that walked this earth, the original inhabitants of this earth, were what you would call sun worshippers. That's right, they were sun worshippers. And nowadays, if you say someone worships the sun, to us modern men and women, that's very primitive and that's paganistic. You're considered a pagan when you worship the sun. But if you research the term pagan, you'll find out that the term pagan means wild, free. That's literally what the term pagan means. So when you call someone a pagan, that means that they're wild. They haven't been indoctrinated into the society of man and the society of what's called common law or common thought. So they're a pagan. They just do what nature tells them to do. They just do what naturally comes right to them. So to us modern men and women, we consider the original people pagans. You read about the story of Adam and Eve and things of that nature. Nowadays in modern society, you would consider Adam and Eve pagans, because Adam and Eve, before God found them, when they were still with the source, remember there's a difference between God and the source. So before God found them, which was actually another being, and began to judge them, they were walking around naked and nude. And they were nude, and they didn't even realize that their body parts were sexual and that their body parts would turn each other on, because they were so used to seeing each other nude and naked. So they were considered pagans. If you go to parts of India, if you go to parts of West Africa today, though I've never been there, but this is what I hear, because I mean, you may see things on television and things of that nature, so I'm basing it off of what I hear and see. But you'll still see, according to, you know, people that have been over there, you'll still see certain tribes that walk around nude and naked. And they're not out there having sex with each other all willy-nilly, and they're not out there, you know, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure they have sex. That's not what I'm pointing out here, but I'm saying the body parts of man and woman, they don't look at them the same the way we do here. See, we here in this society, when we see a woman that's halfway naked, halfway nude, I mean, we ready to get it on. And this is because of the fact that our eyes have been indoctrinated into what's called civilized society. So the original inhabitants of this earth were what you would call pagans, and they worshiped the sun. But over time, as they begin to evolve, they begin to learn the science of nature. That's right, the science of nature and the science of life. Because you have life, and then you have what's called the science of life. So original civilization, what I mean by original civilization, I mean after pagan civilization, when you got into, I guess, original civilization, when men began to, and women, excuse me, because really it was women that started this, when women, who eventually taught men, began to learn how to apply themselves and learn how to think, they begin to build things and they begin to learn what's called technology. Because nature really is just a sophisticated technology, and as they studied and observed nature, they learned that they can make their lives more comfortable and they can make things more easier. Like, say for instance, even the pagans, they had to eat, right? No matter what, they had to eat. So in the beginning, they may have been kind of wild and bohemian like and just kind of ate like savages, like wherever they could get food, however they can get food. And they weren't really civilized. They didn't know what they, necessarily what foods were, I guess the more healthier foods to intake and what foods, didn't sustain life as long. But over time, they learned these things. So this is what the Adam and Eve story is about. So like over time, when the so-called God came into the garden and began to teach Adam and Eve, what the God in the garden was really teaching Adam and Eve was he was teaching, or she, whatever, we don't know what this God's sex was. And I always try to say he or she because I try to remain balanced in my expression of God, because we don't know what this God, the original God that taught Adam and Eve, we don't really know if this was a male or female. And this original God, or these gods actually, because the Bible says gods, came and taught Adam and Eve, which were actually tribes. That's right, Adam was a tribe and Eve was a tribe. See, Eve's original name in Hebrew was Nikebah. And Adam's name, Adam, that was a tribe of 10,000 people, and Eve was a tribe of 10,000 people. Nikebah means tribal leader. So, if you notice that this God originally came to, the serpent gods came to Eve first, or came to the woman first, and the extraterrestrial gods, or the gods that came from on high, came to Adam and taught the tribes of Adam. So I have to tell this story like from the original version so that you'll understand it. And bear with me here, this may be, a video that may be a little bit longer than what some of my normal videos are, but I just have a few things I need to get out on this Sunday school that I want to reintroduce you guys to. So, these tribes of people, Adam and Eve, were taught by these different gods. Serpent gods, and then the celestial gods, the gods that came from on high. And they were taught different lessons. If you notice, the serpent gods taught the lessons of sexual energy, the lessons of desire and gratifying the senses, and the lessons of gratification, and the lessons of feeling good, and the lessons of music and things of that nature. So this is what the information that was brought to the female tribe was more so based on that. And you notice that Adam was taught mostly the names of things, amongst other things. I mean, he was taught a lot of things, and I can't go into every single lesson and teaching here because that would mean you would have to be reinitiated into the mystery school to really get all of the lessons that Adam was taught. And even to get all of the lessons that Eve was taught, you would have to be initiated into the mystery schools to learn everything. But I'm just giving you a broad, very broad overview of what Sunday school is all about. So Adam was taught the names of things and the functionalities of things. And over time, he began to learn that nature and his environment, his surroundings, was really a form of technology. And he began to learn what's called science. And science is to know. The literal meaning of the word science means to know. So he begins to learn what's called the science of life. And the science of life for human beings is to learn to make the quality of life a lot easier to live. See, that's what life is really all about. When you talk about technology, it's supposed to make your life easier. So say for instance, he learned how to garden, the female learn how to garden, how to produce your own food so you don't have to go out and kill an animal every day. And you can have all your foods there right there in your backyard. He learned that he would live longer as a vegetarian, or this tribe. I'm saying he, but really you have to keep in mind this was a group of people learning from a higher advanced group of people. And this advanced group of people lived in a higher dimensional earth, and it was their karma and their job and their assignment to come down to this dimensional earth and teach humans how to upgrade and to speed up their evolution. So he took humans out of what you would call the state of paganhood and brought them into the original civilized state, because now you have the second civilized state, which is really more so just going into what we learn in modern schools and what we learn on television and what we learn after our fall. See, modern civilization, or what you know as civilization now, you have to remember that man fell and woman fell. We fell. Like, this is not the peak of our society. After Egypt, the empire of Egypt was no more, and we lost the knowledge on how to build pyramids and things of that nature, and we lost the knowledge on how to resurrect the dead, because we used to know how to resurrect the dead. We were immortals, so we didn't really die. So when we lost that knowledge, we went into what's called the Dark Ages, and we are just now going into the I guess you could say the finale aspect of that, and they call that the Day of Judgment. We are in the finale aspect of the Dark Ages, and this is what Christians call Judgment Day. So man and woman fell, so we lost a lot of that knowledge. So the second civilization, what I call a second civilization, this is what you know as to be civilized. So like walking around wearing clothes and like I said, when you see a woman half naked, you can't control your sexual desires and just all of this stuff. And we got these cell phones and computers and all of these different things or whatever. This is second civilization. We didn't need these things. It was a time where man and woman was telepathic. That was one of our technologies that was endowed to us and was granted to us by the Most High, who it was a group of beings that came down to teach us, and they taught us the power of telepathy. So we didn't need cell phones. We didn't need a computer to send a communication, because that's what all a computer is for, is to send a communication. We didn't need that because we were naturally telepathic, and we were naturally clairvoyant and naturally clairaudient. So the way that parents would trigger these children's senses is by telling them stories or by projecting to them stories, and this would increase the imagination. So back then you had what's called griots. Just like I'm telling you a story right now, I would be considered somewhat of a griot. And a griot is one who just simply conveyed a story, and the story may have been basic, but the story helps to shape what's called your imagination. And your imagination is the basis of exploration and the basis of exploring like deeper scientific truths to help you to increase your knowledge predicated upon the science of life. You have to have a vivid imagination. So eventually these lessons that were taught after the gods taught, the first Adams and the first Eves, the first Adams and the first Eves set up what's called a mystery school. That's right, a mystery school. And the original mystery school was called the Temple of the Sun. It's called the Temple of the Sun. And it wasn't in this language, English, but when you translate it, it was literally called the Temple of the Sun. And this is what the first pyramids were. See, the first pyramids, they had to perfect the science of the pyramids. They started out as like, they learned the science of the pyramids from ants. Believe it or not. The way that ants build ant mounds, this is how they learn how to construct pyramids. And it took time. That's why you have different types of pyramids. Some of them are more perfect. You see the pyramids in the Giza complex, and those are the more perfect pyramids. But even the pyramids over here that we have here in the West, we have mounds here. We were called the mound builders. So we have mounds here, which are nothing but just pyramids, but they just weren't built exactly the same. They were built based upon our knowledge of how to build them. But around each mound or each pyramid, this is where the deepest knowledge predicated upon the science of life was located at. So say for instance, our largest mound is the Cuyahoga Mounds, which is located between Missouri and Illinois. And if you go to Cuyahoga Mounds to this day, the government has total control over it, but for the most part. But I mean, if you were to start to dig and to start to look for things, ancient artifacts, you would find more about the Native American culture in that area from digging than you would in areas where there weren't any mounds. Just like the serpent mounds. Like I was born in the serpent mounds, actually. And when you go to the serpent mounds, if you were to dig there, you would find more crystals, you would find more artifacts and things of that nature based upon what the Native Americans were taught and what the Native Americans left as a sign of their mighty empire. And their mighty empire, they had transportation, all of that. Like they didn't need vehicles. They had a way to transport themselves based upon using water, because they transported themselves via water. Even though there was a time when humans transported themselves via the air, they knew about how to fly helicopters. If you go and look on the pyramids to this day, there are certain glyphs of helicopters. They drew helicopters before the helicopter was invented. See, they're not telling you this stuff. A lot of you may know this because you guys are deep. I mean, I know a lot of people watch this channel. You guys are deep. So you've been probably studying this stuff for years. But it's a kid out there that went to school that doesn't know that the Egyptians invented the helicopter. Or that the Native Americans invented transportation. And they didn't have to just walk everywhere. Because they had what's called the Ohio River, which goes into the Mississippi River, which goes into the Gulf of Mexico, which you can take that route and go all the way into Mexico. And the Nile River was the equivalent. I'm sorry, I'm calling it the Nile River, but I'm really not sorry, because it really was the equivalent of the Nile River. The Ohio River, the St. Louis River that goes into the Mississippi River and into the Gulf of Mexico. This is the equivalent of what's called the Nile River over in Egypt. So this was what you would call Upper Egypt, or Lower Egypt actually. This is what you would call Lower Egypt, and over there is what you would call Upper Egypt. Some people call this Egypt of the West, and that was Egypt of the East, depending on how you want to look at it. But the bottom line is that Egypt was originally called Tamaray. And Tamaray means earth, water, or sun, which is Ray. And now we're going to go back to the sun again. So they set up mystery schools around these different pyramids, right? Deep stuff. So they was able to, this is the mystery schools where everything is recorded at. And these is where the degrees were recorded at. So now I'm going to go into the degrees based on the science of life. And it was 3 degrees. 3 degrees. Shout out to all my Freemasons that know this. Because a lot of Freemasons know this. And a lot of, Eastern Stars know this, of course, too. And there were 3 degrees. Not the 3 Masonic degrees. I'm not speaking of those degrees, but there were originally 3 degrees in this mystery school. Even though you can get 720 degrees worth of information, that all came later. But the original mystery schools had 3 degrees. And they were based upon the different phases of the sun. And they taught man and woman to be what's called a pharaoh. Now you may be thinking, I've only read about men pharaohs. I didn't know that there were women pharaohs. Excuse me. Let me stretch out here. So you may be thinking, like, I didn't know, that there were women pharaohs. Like, how come they don't talk about the women pharaohs? Because they changed the names and start calling them queens. You read about Queen of Sheba. She was, and you lost your native tongue, so you have to remember that. Pharaoh is what the Greeks called them. Pharaoh means fire, but the original term for Pharaoh was Aaferti. Aaferti. And you can spell it something like Aaferti. And it's a feminine expression. Aaferti is actually a feminine expression. Now, Aaferti means one who makes choices. So your ability to live a good life here in what they call the we call it the Matrix. That's what I call it on my channel, but They call it the underworld. This is what literally the Egyptians called it. Your ability to navigate through the underworld and to make good decisions was based upon your knowledge of the mystery school. And you had to eventually become a Ferti. And there weren't many of them. That's why you don't read about many of them. Because most people, even back then, see, they didn't make it through the mystery schools. You see? So many of them, these people then, they may have went through some of it just like college. They may have went to the first grade and didn't go to the third grade. And they may have just dropped out, or, they went on and took the knowledge that they had based on what they learned in the first grade and made a life off of that. And that was okay. But then you had some that were great, and they became Fertis. These were the great men and women, the men of renown. That's what they call them in the Bible. These were the men and women of renown. These were the praised ones. And they had 3 degrees. And the first degree is what's called, see, there's different rays. When you read about Ra, the sun god Ra, Ra was the architect of the mystery school. He was the architect. Now you got other mysteries, and now he was the architect of the mystery school that was dealing with what the gods taught coming from on high. Because remember I told you there were some serpent gods that came from under the underworld and taught women. And this is another system, though. That's a totally different system that I'm not going to touch here because we're talking about Sunday. They didn't learn this on Sunday. They learned this at the shadow hour. The women learned their knowledge and information during shadow hours. And men could go through this mystery school as well, but the women were taught this first. Just like the men were taught I call it really it's the lesser mysteries. The men were taught the lesser mysteries first, and then they passed it on to the women. The women were taught the greater mysteries first, and they passed it on to the men. And I'll talk about that in another video, the underworld aspect. So you had to become a Ray or a Ra, right? Because Ra is a title. It's much more than just, it was definitely a being and a real live entity that walked the earth named Ra. There's several Ra's. There's probably thousands of Ra's. Just like there's thousands of Adams. But Ra himself, as a character, was something that you had to strive to become. You had to strive to become different phases of Ra. And the first phase of Ra was called, I want to get this right. This was called Atum Ra, or Atum Ray. Now, Atum Ray was the Ray or the Ra that was undifferentiated, according to the meaning of the word. Atum Ray means the undifferentiated one, which means that this is the phase of man and woman where you don't see yourself as different. Like when you're a child, after a certain, like even when you're a child or whatever, like after a certain time, you don't see yourself as like really different. You just see yourself as a part of your family, or as a part of, your community, or as just a part of your environment at that time. Like you don't have an ego because those chakras haven't been open yet. So you just really more so centered around what's called your root chakra at that time. And this is the undifferentiated lessons. So this was the first phase that man had to learn and woman had to learn. And they went through these phases for longer periods of time. See, for you, now the chakras open up every 7 years. So by the time you're 14, you begin to see yourself as being different. But they were taught not to see themselves as different. And this is why, if you notice, a lot of tribes, they all look alike. Like everybody almost looks like they're brothers and sisters. The whole tribe, they all look like, you can't even tell this person from that person. And this is because they were taught the undifferentiated lessons. And this does something to your DNA, and this causes you to look like the person teaching you, or your teacher and the person that passed you on that knowledge, and so you all look alike. And this is how you learn. This is basically the lessons of community, communal living. So this was the first phase of the mystery schools, and these phases weren't perfected. So in the beginning phases of the mystery school, they may have just started out teaching the undifferentiated lessons. I'm going to go into 2 other lessons, but they may not have taught that in the beginning phases. See what I'm saying? Like they may have spent hundreds of years just teaching an undifferentiated lesson. So that's why people back in the day almost looked like clones of one another, because they were learning the undifferent. They lived as communities, as groups. Some people will call this group think, but this is not the same. This is not the same as group think. This is learning how to live in unison and harmony with one. And like now, in this second civilized society, you are really locked into what's called a tune ray, and this is the distinguished one, the one who is unique, the unique one. So you want to be unique. I'm different, like my man 2 Chainz said. Now shout out to 2 Chainz, like I ain't got nothing against him. That's my partner actually. But I'm just saying, like like how he made that song. I'm different. See, this is a phase. This is a school. This is when man and woman learn to be different. And most people didn't make it that far. Remember, a lot of people dropped out. So most people were just stuck in the first phase of it back then. That's why like tribal people, like again, all look alike, because they were stuck in that first phase of it. So they all looked alike. Like they say, all niggas look alike sometimes, right? That was just a joke. Got to bring some humor to this deep information, man, because it's deep. So in the second phase, you have the different. Like this is when you learn to be different. You got an ego, and and most of this is based on your sexuality, really. This is when you get more into your sexuality and more into, like men want to have more than one wife and all of this stuff. That came from that school. So originally, you was grouped into pairs when it came to get married. So really, originally, it wasn't no more than one woman or anything like that. You just had your life partner. You had one woman. You took unto yourself one wife, and that was your life partner. This is when you were in the undifferentiated phase. So when you got into that second phase or whatever, this is when you became to be more unique. And this is what humans are stuck in right now. Actually, in our fall, we're stuck in that phase of the mystery school. Where even though, you got a wife and family and stuff like that, you come home, but everybody wants to be different. Everybody wants to be, like they want to show out. Everybody wants to show that they got more, like they got more than this person, or look what I got, or look what I'm doing. And it's based on competition. See, all of that competition stuff, that's going into the second phase, which is the undifferentiated phase. And you stuck there, and there's a better phase for you to be in that's better than even the first phase, which is the undifferentiated one, because the thing about the undifferentiated one, or the one who isn't unique, or who is just like, his brother and sister, or her sister and brother, is the fact that there's no expression. You locked into your ego. You see? So I mean, you're not. I'm sorry. You're not locked into your ego. You don't really know what your ego is. So this is why a lot of, like, if you notice, a lot of Easterners, they're in that phase. They're naturally still kind of in that phase. And when they come over here to the West, they learn more about the ego, because here in the West, we in the second phase of the mystery schools. And they learn about their ego more, so they like it. They like, oh, I can be different. I can drive around in a car that looks totally different. I can get me a 101 Porsche Boxster, you see what I'm saying, and look different. I can have all this money and get all these different women and do all of this. I can be different. I can get a chance to express myself. And that's okay. That's a phase of our evolution as humans. But most people, again, even in metaphysics, they never make it to the next phase that I'm going to talk about. So you stuck there. In the East, they stuck on the first phase because they're so, selfless, and they're so giving, and they live in such more of a community environment. And a lot of that is based on economics, too. The reason why they're in that phase or whatever, because of the fact that a lot of these third world countries, they don't live off the dollar and things of that nature. So they have to live in a community environment. That's the best quality of life for them, because they don't have money in their pocket where they could just be free to walk around and go buy stuff from all over like that. They may have their own local currency. They may trade in bones, or they may trade in, different other exchanges and barter in different other exchanges, so that limits their activity. So this is why they're locked into the undifferentiated phase. Now, the final phase that you would learn in the mystery school would be what's called A moon ray. A moon ray. And this is a phase that most people never get into. This is when you become immortal, you see. This is what Jesus actually, this is the phase that Jesus demonstrated. When you read about him in the Bible, he was demonstrating a moon ray. And this means this is the hidden one. This is the hidden ray. This is when you don't have you give up your identity. And you're you, but then you can surface in and you can project into different phases of the matrix at will. You can manifest at will and do and get what you want at will, and then go back to the undifferentiated phase. So what do I mean by that? See, in the undifferentiated phase, you don't have bill collectors and people calling you and things of that nature, and you don't have anybody to answer to, period. There is no one to answer to. You are what's called an immortal. You can live off the earth if that's what you choose to do, or you can project in and live in a mansion because you've mastered the realms of life, and you can do all of this without using your identity or your name. And on one video, when I was talking about the names, I talked about how the Egyptians had what's called the hidden name. This goes into the undifferentiated phase. So they would hide their name at this point, and they would just be known as the Pharaoh. This is what the Pharaoh was. He was really hidden because nobody really saw the Pharaoh. This is where they got the Wizard of Oz from. The Pharaoh was the wizard. If you notice that in the Wizard of Oz, nobody saw him. They heard his voice, but nobody saw him. And they started a whole brotherhood in Greece called the Silent Brotherhood, based off of this undifferentiated phase. Or I'm sorry, not the undifferentiated phase, but based on this hidden phase. So I guess what I'm saying in this hidden phase, this is when you learn to be a shapeshifter. This is when you learn to move in and out of different aspects of society without leaving much of a paper trail or leaving much of a mark, a watermark, if you, or what may have you, or much of a trail as to what you've been doing. And there was a reason why they had to live like this, and this is because the knowledge that they was given and the secrets that they were entrusted with at this degree and at this phase was so deep that even someone just knowing so much as their name could cause them havoc. Because at this phase, this is the phase that everybody, these were the men that were idle. Remember, these were the men of renown, so these were the men and women that were sought after. People were jealous of, even, and wanted to be them. But how do you get to live in that big old pyramid? And you got they had what's called the King's Chamber, and they living up in the King's Chamber, and they got this view. They were able to see the whole society from the King's Chamber, and they're able to see all the different star constellations from the King's Chamber. And when it got dark out at night, and they had the benefits of being able to enjoy the full alignment with Orion during that time, because remember, the pyramids were built during the Orion phase. You see, so the beings from Orion is what really, they were the real gods that taught the Egyptians. Heaven, when you read about heaven in the Bible, that's really talking about Orion. Originally, one of the original terms for heaven, I always say this in my videos, was Uranus. Uranus. And Uranus means Orion. And they took that out and put in heaven. Originally, that heaven was Orion, so these beings were so cold, they was even leaving the earth. Because the pyramids were also launching pads to other dimensions and galaxies, so they was even taken by the gods at times, and they was able to leave the earth and come back. So their perspective and their vision was more broad, so they were able to make better choices than the common man. Remember, I told you a pharaoh means one who makes choices. This is what made them this phase of the pharaoh, the Amun Ray phase, because their decision making was keen. They have what's called an overstanding, because they were able to look down on the earth from flying in those ships with those extraterrestrials for all of those years, and picking up and acquiring all of that different information, and going to these different constellations like Nirvana, and even you read about like Shiva and them. These were extraterrestrials that reached that enlightened state. This was really true enlightenment, was when you were able to see the perspective of life from off of the earth. And this brotherhood still exists, people. There's people leaving this planet and coming back. And it's done within certain governments around this world. I'm not just talking about extraterrestrials coming in at night and picking you up and taking you, even though that's a way to do it too. But it's actually done where people can pay money and leave and go chill out on one of the moons of Mars somewhere and then come back. Or go chill on the dark side of the moon and come back. That's happening right now. So this is what's called the silent brotherhood. This is what's called, again, at moon ray. This was the phase of Sunday school, or the temple of sun, that these men and women were into. So that's what Sunday school was about. That's what really life was about. Was about learning in general. That's why it was called the mystery school. It was about your whole life. You was put here to learn lessons to prepare for your death. But what they not teaching you is that the Egyptians spent all this time preparing for their death because they knew that they wasn't going to die. You see, they were immortals. So they knew they had the cure for death. And they knew the cure for death was located in the breath. So when you get into the last phase of the moon ray phase, the hidden phase, you spend a lot more time by yourself. You spend a lot more time by yourself. You spend a lot more time meditating because you're preparing to become an immortal. You're preparing to master death. You're preparing for that day when something may happen where you lose the breath of life. They were taught how to regain and get that back and to resurrect again. So why do you think they was buried? The pharaohs was buried with all of these different things. And they could, once they died, they could capture all the things that they were buried with in their aura and take them with them to a higher dimension. So even though you see the graves and they dig up the graves and they see those things they were buried with now, but they don't realize that they took those things with them to another dimension as thought forms and created a new life based upon the resurrection of the dead. This is what Jesus taught. He taught the resurrection of the dead. Remember, he said he came to make, he said, let the dead bury the dead and let the living follow me. So he wanted to resurrect you, to take you out of the state of mental death, of thinking that you had to die, or once you died, that was it. No matter how you died, you could come back if you mastered meditation, if you mastered your breath during prolonged states of solitude. If you were able to master that, you were able to master the hidden phase, and you were able to become a Furti or a mortal or a pharaoh, and you would be worshipped forever. And you would live for thousands and thousands of years, and nobody would ever see you die. Really, at the end of the day, this is why they, even when they died, they just kept, it's like the culture just keeps going on. Just think about it. We still talking about Ra right now. Ra was supposedly had walked the earth thousands and thousands of years ago, according to the first people that discovered the information about Ra. So why are we still talking about him? Because, of course, Ra is still alive. They ain't dead. The pharaoh, the original people that built this earth and that constructed this earth, you call them extraterrestrials. These are just the original beings that mastered the mystery schools. And you call them your higher self and angels and things like that and your ancestors. But that's really, that was a higher phase of us. And that's them coming back to pull us up and to teach us to become them. So it's a lot of really good movies that you can watch that bears witness to this. You know, I'm not going to go into naming titles now because I've overstayed my welcome, but extraterrestrials is real. But what they're not even teaching you is that you were the extraterrestrials of the past, which is really the future, that came and abducted yourself and taught you. That was you. That was a higher aspect of you. When you had, if you had a miracle and you saw a light being and you saw this light being materialize in your room or something, that was you in the future, materializing on a higher dimension. This is the Egyptians been mastered this stuff, and they putting it in the movies and stuff now. They've been mastered. That's 5D or whatnot. That's what they calling it now. They've been mastered 5D through going through those 3 degrees and mastering them. So I'll do separate videos on those 3 different degrees and helping you to really understand the science and process of life. But you can learn this stuff by just watching nature. Get out and sun gaze. It's beautiful out here. On Sunday, go to church. But not in a building. Go to the circle. The sacred circle. Which is finding you some type of land somewhere and sitting and looking at the sacred circle, which is that black dot or that sun. And staring at that sun, you're going to see that there's cities out there. in the cosmos. You can see them, but your eyes haven't been trained. You blind. Remember, Jesus made the blind to see. You're blind, literally though. Like when they say Jesus made the blind to see, people think, oh, that means that he woke them up, like they could see, but that means that he made them to be able to like see things that they couldn't see by teaching them knowledge. Yeah, that's part of it, but he literally taught them how to see. I can look at that sun right now, and I have witnesses bearing me witness, and after you looking at it for a period of time, you can begin to see things that most people don't see that are around you. There are beings around you right now. There are UFOs out there right now. There's different forms of nature out there right now, but you don't see them, and they'll show you how to invent this or how to do that, or what's a better way to do this or what's a better way to do that. We are surrounded by what's called divine intervention. We're surrounded by miracles. They got cities up on the sun. The sun is a generator. The sun powers all kind of shit around here. So it's like, this is what you learn, you know, in the mystery schools, and this is why it's called a mystery, because to some people it's an enigma, you know. So I hope you learned something. I really thank you guys for listening. I really thank you guys for watching, listening to this kind of lengthy video, but it was needed. And until my next, I'm going to leave you in Hotep, Namaste, peace and love. Have a beautiful Sunday. Que pasa? Adios.